So in this video, we're going to just take a quick look at some of the things that took place between the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a Seleucid ruler who comes to take control over the area that we now know as Palestine, or refer to as Palestine, a name that comes a little bit later. But Antiochus, after is one of these Greek rulers, or kind of Greek descendants, of the generals who rule in the absence or after the death of Alexander the Great. And so now we are moving in here to around the area of the 2nd century BCE. And so Antiochus has got control of Palestine, but he wants more areas in the empire or the kingdom of the Ptolemies, which is Egypt. But as he takes over some of this area, one of the things that begins to happen is he wants to try and force kind of Greek ways on all his territories. By forcing Greek ways, this is what we referred to in a previous video about Hellenization. And so generally amongst Greeks, they allowed for a plethora of different gods and for different peoples to worship their gods. And the idea is just basically, let's add other gods to the gods that people are worshiping. Well, that might work for many other parts of the ancient world, but it doesn't work for Jews who felt like Yahweh was the only God who should be worshipped within the temple. And there was this resistance of recognizing other gods as equal or on par or should be worshipped. So Jews were hesitant or reluctant to want to worship other gods. So one of the things that helped to unify Antiochus' kingdom is the kind of acceptance of the religion and acceptance of the gods that are at work to empower Antiochus. And so Antiochus, his own name, this Epiphanes that he takes on, is this kind of exalted one, highest one. And so this resistance by Jews was an issue of frustration for him. Well, he could overlook it for a while, but after he tries to take on more of the Ptolemaic kingdom, he is rebuffed by the Romans, and he decides then to turn his anger, frustrations in on Jews. Plus, he's also having to pay huge tributes to the Romans, and decides to sack, as it were, the temple, because temples were oftentimes places where there was wealth that was stored. And that would have been true as well for the Jewish temple, because wealth was sometimes thought to be protected by the gods of that temple. You wouldn't rob that temple because you could be chased or hurt by the god of that temple. But Antiochus sacks it, tries to get money, and he decides then to stop this resistance to his power and to his gods. And he begins to force, as it were, the worship of the Greek god Zeus, which we also may be known as the Roman god Jupiter. But he allows certain of his mercenaries who help him take over Jerusalem to worship their God in the Jerusalem temple. And this gets referred to in the book of Daniel as the abomination of desolation. In other words, it's an abomination to worship another God in the Jerusalem temple, to, as it were, give preference to another God that should be given to Yahweh. And so, of course, for Antiochus, maybe there was something as well. He had lost out to the Ptolemies. Maybe there was something where the gods weren't supportive of him. He wanted to get the gods on his side so he could be stronger. And the Jews had been resisting him worshiping his God and other gods in order to make victories happen. So whatever the reasons may have been, he kind of takes over the temple and now supplants that. He also tries to basically eradicate the Jewish faith, because there are certain things that Jews did that other groups did not do. Jews have this practice of not working on the Sabbath, and they have their festivals. And so Antiochus begins to forbid this. They also do this thing of circumcision of boys, and that's kind of seen as barbaric by Greeks. They don't understand why this would be happening, so he's stopping that. He orders destructions of the Torah, which are their books that they are using to validate or support their practices. And so several of these things are happening that is really going to cause consternation, particularly among the priesthood, who have their likelihood or their livelihood is done in the sacrificial practices in the Jerusalem temple. Now that you have a different God than Yahweh, so some Jews might be willing to placate Antiochus and settle for what Antiochus does, but others do not want this to happen. Others see this as this abomination, as something that should not be allowed. Jews should not be involved in this. So what's going to eventually happen, we get this account from Josephus, is Antiochus is going to send a representative into the various villages and coerce, call for Jews to participate in these new rules. He goes to one particular town that is called Modin, and there he calls for people to come and make a sacrifice to Antiochus's god. A Jew steps forward, willing to do this, but there is living in this town a priest by the name of Mattathias. And Mattathias sees what is happening, sees this Jew who is going to sacrifice to a different god, trying to lead other Jews to engage in this behavior. And so Matthias executes, he kills that Jew, and he kills the representative from Antiochus. And this basically launches a revolt. So this launches this family into leading a revolt, a Jewish revolt against Antiochus. So all this is happening around 180, late 170s of the BCE period. So we're in the 2nd century BCE. So this altar to Zeus is in the temple. This really becomes the last straw around 160 BCE. The Maccabean then war results from these above actions and the struggles to free Jews from what Antiochus is doing. So it all kind of centers around Jerusalem, centers around Judea, and these fights. Now, this word Maccabean, this comes from one of the sons, the nickname of one of the sons of Antiochus, Judas Maccabeus. It is a nickname. The word Maccabeus means hammerer, and that term was given to Judas because of his particular military campaigns, guerrilla warfare activities, where he is able to strike down Antiochus's armies. Antiochus is not able to force a large, full-scale military operation in Palestine. He has other battles that he is having to deal with on his eastern fronts and western fronts, and he's got internal conflicts that are going on within his empire. So he's not able to unleash a full military attack in Palestine. So the amount of armies that he's able to allow to go into Palestine are able to be routed, as it were, by the guerrilla tactics of the Maccabeans. So they're able to hide in the hills, come down where these armies are, attack them at nighttime, and then scatter back into the hills, just causing disruption. And so this is what's going to happen for a while until Antiochus says, all right, I'm fed up with all of this. I don't want to keep dealing with this issue. And so I'm going to allow you to create something of what we might be called a temple state, where you can practice your faith in your temple. You can have that back, and you can practice your faith, but I still need tribute from you. I still need taxes from you. So as long as you're willing to send to me your taxes and tributes, you can stay as this kind of vassal state within my domain, which the Jews are willing to secede to. And so this family, what we refer to as the Hasmonean family, is going to kind of take control. So the festival that is celebrated in our time with as Hanukkah is a remembrance of this period of kind of taking over the temple and the victory that is won, and this deliverance, as it were, of the temple from the abomination of desolation, from the worship of a pagan ruler, and a pagan god in that temple. And so this is the beginning of this Hasmonean family. So I have here kind of a chart of the Hasmonean family. Here we have Mattathias, this father who began this revolt in Modin, and we have several of his sons. Some of his sons are, good. Some of them are killed. Judas is the better fighter in the family, but it's the second son, Simon, that really seems to have who rules and has offsprings who will rule after him. So you have Simon, who will have a Judas, and then a John Hyrcanus, and then another Matthias. But it's really John Hyrcanus who takes over, who is going to end up ruling. And during these times, these rulers are going to expand the territories that they control. So we'll have John Hyrcanus, who will have a son named Aristobulus I, another one named Antigonus, and then another one named Alexander Jannaeus. John Hyrcanus is particularly good at extending the control up into Samaria and Galilee. And so once they take over these other lands in Palestine, then Judeans, so those people living around Jerusalem, Judea, they move up, they begin to settle into these other areas that had been, settled and farmed by either descendants who had been left over from when it was the kingdom of Israel after the breakup of Solomon's kingdom, or there were Gentiles who had moved into these areas. And one of the things that John Hyrcanus did when he took over these areas is he required boys and men to be circumcised. If they were not circumcised, they had to be circumcised. So, in other words, he's kind of creating this theocratic state. So John Hyrcanus was an important figure in terms of the expansion of the Hasmonean family, what we call the Maccabean kingdom. And so his time is oftentimes referred to as the Middle Maccabean kingdom. But then with his children, particularly his sons, Aristobulus I, who marries a woman by the name of Alexandria Salome, and then she's going to end up marrying Alexander Jannaeus. It's Alexander Jannaeus who's going to end up taking control and being kind of the king of the area. And these kings, as well, have taken on the role of high priest. So this really starts early on, where they are recognized as high priest and as king. They hold both positions. Some priests did not like this, that the priests and the king were the same person. It may be that during this time we also see an exodus from Jerusalem and the temple of a priestly group that forms the community at Qumran. The community at Qumran, those who were responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls, look like they may have come from a kind of a priestly background. They have strong kind of sacrificial interest, an interest with Jerusalem. They talk about the wicked priest. So it's not quite sure who that wicked priest is. Is it Simon? Is it John Hyrcanus? But somewhere along the line, that community gets established during this period of turmoil. Alexander Jannaeus is also quite good at maintaining control and stability within the kingdom. He makes alliances with Sadducees, who are connected with the aristocrats of Jerusalem and with priests. He angers Pharisees, so we've got these groups, Pharisees and Sadducees, who have come onto the scene, who are trying to exert influence on the obedience and the faithfulness of Jews to God. They have different ideas about what that faithfulness would look like. Uh, Alexander Jannaeus sides with those who are wealthier rather than the poor people, who oftentimes Pharisees are more associated with the lower class or or poor individuals, although they too have wealthy individuals connected to their kind of movement or school of thought. But Jannaeus is going to end up marrying Alexander Salome, and as he is dying, he realizes the mistake that he has made in maintaining support from the larger populace by not befriending the Pharisees, who have a great deal of influence amongst more rural, populous people. So he instructs or tells his wife that she should rule after him and to make friends with the Pharisees. So upon his death, she quickly turns around and make friends with the Pharisees. So quickly does she bring them into her fold and befriends them and pushes out Sadducees, that the Pharisees, even at the funeral for Alexander Jannaeus, ends up praising and honoring him, even though they had been enemies with him. So since she is queen, she can't be high priest. So she has two sons, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. And Hyrcanus is the first son, and so he becomes high priest. Aristobulus II is the second son, but he ends up becoming a better military type of presence, a military figure. And he's going to want to try and challenge Hyrcanus for both the priesthood, since that's really the ultimate power, as well as being king. And he's going to really want to become king, be the one with control from his mother. So after Alexander Salome dies, then we have this kind of civil war between Hyrcanus and Aristobulus II. And so Hyrcanus II has a daughter, Alexandra, and notice how Hellenistic all of this they have become. Although this group was resistant to Hellenism, we get a lot of names here that are very Hellenistic. So, like the name Jonathan or John, or the name Alexandra, Alexander. So all these names are Hellenistic names, but they're trying to maintain control of Palestine. So Aristobulus II has a son. He calls him Alexander, and he also has another son, Antiochus II. So there's going to be this fight here between them, and one of the things that happens is Hyrcanus and Aristobulus both try to appeal to Rome to intervene. And Rome does go to intervene, but first of all, they're going to side with Aristobulus II and then with Antiochus II. And but Antiochus is going to end up doing something that shows he doesn't trust the Romans. He's going to end up fortifying walls that makes the Romans suspicious about him. So they're going to swing their alliance then with Hyrcanus II. But primarily then it's going to end up with where Rome decides neither of these families can rule directly. Instead, now Palestine is going to come under the control of the Romans. So this civil war within this Hasmonean family opens up the way so that somebody like Pompey, who is the general coming into this area, kind of annexes Palestine to their Syrian province. But that's not the end of the influence of this family. So you can see here that one of the people who, with Alexandra and Alexander marrying, they have two sons, Aristobulus III, they have a son, Aristobulus III, and they also have a daughter, Marimi. Well, this Merimee is going to end up marrying Herod the Great. She's going to end up being like his third wife. And Herod the Great, because of his father, Antipater, helped the Romans kind of come in and gain control of this area. He's an Idumean, which means he's not really Jewish. He comes from a different kind of tribe in the area, but who had been taken over by John Hyrcanus. So he's going to help the Romans settle this dispute, come in and provide peace and stability within the area. The Romans are going to reward Antipater for his help by allowing his sons to become governors of the region. Herod the Great is going to become governor of Galilee. His other son is going to become governor of Jerusalem, but this other son of Antipater is not going to hold out being very successful, and so eventually Herod the Great is going to take over the whole area. Herod trying to cement his relationship with Jews that he is now going to rule over on behalf of the Romans, ends up marrying one of the members of this Hasmonean family, so this royalty. His other wives did not belong to this family, but this one did, and so hoping that their sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, could then take over from Herod the Great. Unfortunately, this is not going to work out because these brothers are going to be accused later on by Herod of trying to plot to take over his kingdom, and he's going to end up killing both Merimee and he's going to kill his own sons. So that's something here, and that really ends in this Hasmonean family and this dynasty all the way up into the time of Herod the Great. All right, so we will leave that. That gives you a very brief, quick review of how we move from Antiochus Epiphanes all the way to the beginning with Herod the Great.